the medicine is reaching its site of action to produce an action. So most drugs, when taken, that's what we're going to discuss now. Most drugs, when taken, get absorbed. I mean, if you consider the most common route as oral, they get absorbed, they are distributed, and when they get distributed, some of them may get bound to proteins, get stored in storage tissues. The free drug is available to produce an action. It gets metabolized and then excreted. So you see the drug which is taken here undergoes absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. And somewhere in this, it produces an action. Okay, that means the drug is moving in the body. And when it's moving in the body, it's usually moving across the cell membranes. The basic membrane against which drugs have to be transported is the cell membrane. And you people know everything about the cell membrane from your class 12 biology and your first year anatomy and biochemistry. So the movement of drugs is maybe across a single layer of cells, as in the intestine, the intestinal epithelium, or maybe across multiple layers of cells, as in the skin. So what we're going to discuss over the next 35 minutes is mechanisms by which drugs cross membranes, the physico-chemical properties of the membranes which determine movement of drugs, and the physico-chemical properties of the drugs which determine how much of the drug will move across the membrane and produce an action. So, what are the properties of a drug which determine its movement? Number one, molecular size. Number two, lipid solubility, which is determined by the lipid-water partition coefficient. Number three, degree of ionization. And number four, the extent of binding to serum proteins. Now, just a few lines about each of these, because I think this is covered in biochemistry in much greater detail. Now, most drugs, the average size of most commonly used drugs is between 100 Daltons to 1,000 Daltons. Lesser than 100 Daltons, the action of the drug becomes very, very non-specific. And, its configuration, its binding to a receptor, everything becomes non-specific. So we don't want a drug to have a non-specific action. Beyond 1,000 Dalton, it is difficult for the drug molecule to move across biological membranes. So most drugs are between 100 to 1,000 Dalton. And so the smaller weight, the drug molecules with the smaller molecular weight can cross the drug membranes, while the larger ones would not be able to cross the biological membrane, and they would require special mechanisms which would enable the drug to move across the membranes. For example, pinocytosis, phagocytosis, transcytosis, maybe facilitated drug transfer or active transfer, etc. So molecular size, very important. Molecules of 100 to 200 Dalton can move with the bulk flow of water across membranes. They can move through the intercellular gaps in between the cells. Lipid solubility, lipid-water partition coefficient. The cell membrane allows lipid-soluble, non-polar drugs to move across. So it is only lipid-soluble, non-polar compounds which are non-charged that can move across the cell membrane. Polar, charged molecules, ionized molecules or drugs cannot move freely across the biological membrane. Of course, all drugs, however lipid-soluble, would require to be dissolved in water to some extent so that, dissolution occurs and then the drug dissolved in the water moves across the cell membrane. The third point is degree of ionization. Now, like I just said, a drug which gets ionized becomes polar, and polar compounds are lipid insoluble and hence cannot move across membranes. The fourth point, binding to serum proteins. It is only the free drug which can move across biological membranes. And we'll talk about all these points by and by as the lectures go on, because right now you don't know too much of systemic pharmacology, so I would not be giving you many examples. I would be giving you classically one or two examples to explain most of the points. So this is a revision. What is a cell membrane? It comprises of a lipid bilayer, which is relatively impermeable to highly polar molecules. And the lipids are aligned in a way such that their hydrophobic ends are directed inwards and the hydrophilic ends are directed outwards. That is, these lipids are amphipathic. They have a hydrophilic end directed outwards and a hydrophobic end directed inwards. And in between the lipid bilayer, you have isolated, individual cholesterol and lipid molecules which traverse the membrane and give the cell membrane specificity, structural cell specificity. Proteins in between, in the lipid bilayer, we have proteins which are embedded, and these proteins they act as structural anchors, they act as receptors, they make ion channels, transporters for endogenous and exogenous substances, and they transduce chemical and signal pathways. These proteins are highly ordered, and they are highly ordered, and they are subject to inhibition. So you have drugs which can act on any of these components, inhibiting that particular action. And you will see when we talk about pharmacodynamics and drug action, how many drugs act by inhibiting or binding to one or more of these proteins. Okay, this is a recap. So this is the lipid bilayer cell membrane. These are the lipids, and the blue areas are the proteins. This is the hydrophobic end, and these are the hydrophilic. The round globules are the hydrophilic end, polar end, while the hydrophobic ends are directed inwards. Okay, now let's talk about the different components moving across. So the cell membrane is relatively permeable to water. Water moves across membranes by diffusion. The flow resulting from hydrostatic or osmotic differences. This water can carry small molecules, and only unbound drugs can move across with the water. Now, in the cell membrane are junctions. The cell membrane junctions, in some of the cells where the two cells join, where the junction is, are intercellular gaps. These intercellular gaps provide for paracellular passage of drugs and other molecules. Now, the distance, this paracellular passage, the width of this paracellular passage may vary in different cells. In some tissues, such as the capillary endothelium, especially in the kidney, these intercellular gaps are very wide, while in the brain, the intercellular the cells are attached to each other with tight junctions. And this is to do with the functioning. The kidney requires gaps to allow for filtration of water, of blood, and movement of electrolytes and substances out of the blood into the urine. And in the brain, we have tight junctions to prevent free entry of exogenous substances. These tight junctions are there to protect the brain from harmful substances. So through the intercellular gaps, water and small drug molecules, 100 to 200 Daltons, can. This is a diagram. This is an example of an endothelial cell in the kidney, or in a blood vessel in the kidney, or any other capillary also. So in between the endothelial cells are gaps. Now these gaps allow for movement of both lipid soluble through the cell and lipid insoluble polar drug through the intercellular gap. In the brain capillary, the endothelial cells are attached very closely and the gaps are minimal or negligible. Tight junctions are there. So only lipid-soluble non-polar compounds can move across the cell membrane. Lipid-insoluble polar drugs are unable to cross the tight junctions in the brain. So, drugs cross membranes by the following processes: passive process, active process, facilitated processes, specialized processes including filtration, endocytosis, exocytosis, and transcytosis. Now, all these have been done in great detail in biochemistry. So, what the next couple of slides will probably be revision for all of you. So, what is passive diffusion? Passive movement of drugs. Movement of drugs across a down a concentration gradient from higher concentration to lower concentration. No energy is required, no carriers. The process is not saturable. There is no inhibitor for such a process. And it depends upon the lipid solubility in the lipid bilayer and hence the lipid water partition coefficient. Passive transfer is related directly proportional to the surface area of the membrane exposed. The movement passive transfer of ionic compounds would depend upon the electrochemical gradient and differences in the pH. We'll talk about this. We'll just talk about ionic compounds and effect of differences in pH. So passive movement of drugs, very simple. Most important, no energy is needed. It is not saturable and there are no inhibitors. So no drugs can actually inhibit passive movement of drugs. So what is this influence of pH? You know that weak acids and bases ionize depending upon the pH of the medium in which they are there. Most drugs are weak acids and bases. The few drugs which are strong acids and bases exist in the ionized form. You know, highly ionized substances exist as ions. So the drugs which are highly ionic exist as ions, but majority of drugs are weak acids and bases, and their degree of ionization is dependent upon the pH and the pK value. Now, pK is the pH at which a drug is half ionized. You know what the pK and pH is much better than we do. Non-ionized substances are lipid soluble. And the distribution of a weak electrolyte depends upon the pK and pH of the medium in which the weak electrolyte is located. And all this ionization and dissociation of weak acids and bases is dependent upon the Henderson and Hasselbalch equation. Okay, you know these equations. I've just put these so that it's a recap for you. I suggest you go and have a look at it in your biochemistry textbooks. The Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. Now, what are the clinical implications of pH, pK on the degree of ionization of drugs which are weak acids and bases? Aspirin is absorbed to a great extent, aspirin in the stomach. Now, aspirin is an acidic drug. It has a pK of 3.49. When you take it orally, it enters the gastric lumen, which is acidic. You know gastric juice is acidic. It has a pH ranging from 1 to 3. So aspirin, which has a pK of 3.49, when present in gastric juice of pH 1 to 3, remains what? Will it get ionized or non-ionized in the gastric juice? I want somebody to answer. Will aspirin with a pK of 3.49, what will it be in the gastric juice? Will it be ionized or non-ionized? Yes. Majority of people are saying, Arvachi has said non-ionized, Khyati has said non-ionized, Prakar, Rashmi Ahmed, excellent, Mohit, Supriya, so you understood. Yes. So aspirin in stomach will remain unionized. Now it diffuses across the gastric lumen into the gastric cell. And there, when it diffuses across into the plasma or the endothelial cell plasma has a pH of 7.4. What will happen over here? What will happen over here? As it moves across the gastric cell into the blood cells, what will happen? Ionize. Absolutely right. Because an acidic drug is entering an alkaline medium. So when the drug gets ionized there, uh, it gets ionized. Now, an ionic compound is lipid insoluble. Will this ionized aspirin, which is there in the gastric cell now, be able to diffuse back into the gastric lumen? Yes, absolutely right. Mohit Prakar, there would be trapping of aspirin molecules or the aspirin ions in the gastric cell. So ion trapping would occur, and it is this ion trapping which is responsible for the gastric injury caused by drugs like aspirin in the stomach. So intake of aspirin is a very common cause of gastric ulceration, gastric irritation. So we always say that if aspirin has to be taken, it should always be taken after a meal. Never be taken empty stomach. Okay. Now let's go on to the intestine. Not the intestine. Let's see some basic drugs. Drugs like codeine, heroin, amphetamine. These are basic drugs. Now, codeine has a pKa of 7.9. So, what will happen in the stomach? Stomach has an acidic pH. Codeine will get ionized, and it gets ionized. So, if it gets ionized, will it move across into the bloodstream? Yes. Will it move across into the bloodstream? No. So codeine will, because it's got ionized in the gastric acid, it will remain in the lumen. And so this is so this is a very important point, that basic drugs in the gastric lumen will not move into the gastric stomach. I mean, will not move across into the cell and into the bloodstream, but will tend to remain in the lumen because they get ionized. And these are drugs of abuse, heroin, amphetamine, even codeine can be abused. So this point is made use of in forensic science. We do an analysis of the gastric contents, suspecting intake of these drugs of abuse, and you would find that these drugs would be there in the gastric lavage, in the gastric lumen. They would not have moved into the bloodstream, not for a long, long time. Now, so let's come on into the intestine. Intestine has an alkaline pH. So alkaline drugs would be absorbed here. And ion trapping here is not significant as the pH differences are not very significant, So intestinal lumen is alkaline, intestinal cell and the plasma are alkaline. So ion trapping is not of any much significance in the intestine. Now, if these differences arising because of pH differences in the lumen and in the plasma are much greater in the stomach than in the intestine, and these differences, which result in disproportionate ionization in the stomach, can be neutralized, by intake of certain drugs like neutralization of gastric contents by antacids. Now, antacids decrease, they neutralize the acid and quantitatively they decrease the pH difference between the lumen and the plasma, and hence this would decrease the quantitative disparity between the stomach and intestine also. So the differences arising because of differences in pH would get neutralized if antacids are taken by the persons. Now, coming to the kidney. Kidney has a urine pH ranging from 4.5 to 8, depending on different sites in the tubules. Making use of the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation and the fact that drugs are weak acids and bases that tend to get ionized depending on the pH of the medium, This fact is made use of in promoting excretion of drugs by altering the urine pH. If you want acidic drugs to be excreted, we alkalinize urine, and to promote the excretion of basic drugs, we acidify urine, or we can acidify urine, but it is not preferred. So, acidic drugs examples include salicylic acid or aspirin. So, in salicylate poisoning or toxicity, sodium bicarbonate is given to alkalinize the urine, and this results in ionization of aspirin and it's promoting its excretion in the alkalinized urine. Now, basic drugs include drugs like codeine, amphetamine, etc. So we could acidify urine using ammonium chloride, but this is not preferred because giving an agent which causes acidification of urine would also cause systemic acidosis, which can promote cardiac problems, rhabdomyolysis, etc. So acidification of urine is really not preferred. Other ways are used to help promote excretion of basic drugs. So is this clear? Implications of pH on ionization, and ionization would determine lipid solubility and hence movement of the drug across membranes. Is it clear? Is it clear? Shivansh, what do you want me to explain? What aspect? Shivansh, can you write what you want me to explain to you? Alkalinization is preferred. Acidification is not preferred. To cause excretion of basic drugs in the urine, we would have to acidify the urine. To acidify the urine, you would have to give agents that cause urine acidification. These can actually promote acidosis. They can cause cardiac problems. Acidification would, because you have to give drugs to cause acidification of urine, the drug would have to be given systemically. It would cause systemic alterations also. Okay, and that acidosis can cause problems for the patient. It is not a preferred way of treating. Okay, again, now going on to how further ionization affects movement of drugs across biological membranes. Drugs which are ionized are polar, they are lipid insoluble. So strongly ionic drugs exist as ions. They will not move freely across membranes. Drugs with a quaternary ammonium charge, such as neostigmine, is it is not lipid soluble and cannot be given orally. So neostigmine is given parenterally or is given as an injection. Neostigmine is a cholinergic drug. It is an anti-choline esterase. On the other hand, we have another tertiary amine, physostigmine. Physostigmine is also a cholinergic drug, an anti-choline esterase, but it has a tertiary amine structure. Now, this structure the drug is lipid soluble and can move across membranes. So these drugs have cholinergic activity, and one of the uses is in overdose or poisoning by anticholinergic drugs like atropine. So in atropine poisoning, to reverse atropine poisoning or to treat atropine poisoning, if a cholinergic drug has to be given, we prefer physostigmine and not neostigmine, because physostigmine, being lipid soluble, can cross the body membranes, the cell membranes, as well as cross the blood-brain barrier, taking care of the central effects of atropine also. Okay? While neostigmine, being a quaternary ammonium compound, it has a quaternary ammonium charge, cannot cross it is polar, it is lipid insoluble, it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So we prefer physostigmine and not neostigmine in Atropa belladonna poisoning. When we talk of these drugs in greater detail in autonomic nervous system pharmacology, this example will be revisited then. Aminoglycosides are a very commonly used group of antibiotics. Now, aminoglycosides are polar compounds. Because they are polar, they cannot be given orally because they would not get absorbed in the intestine. Hence, aminoglycosides as antibiotics are always given as injections. Please remember why, and an example of a new aminoglycoside is streptomycin. Another example of this for local use, I will tell you, uh, neomycin. Okay, I'll talk about that when we talk of routes of drug administration. Another example, second generation antihistamine drugs like terfenadine. Now, antihistaminic drugs, maybe many of you would have taken for cold, allergies, etc. Drugs like chlorpheniramine, promethazine, etc. Now, first generation antihistamine drugs cause a very common side effect of sedation. One feels sleepy when one takes these drugs. So, to overcome sedation, second generation antihistamines have been developed and includes a drug like terfenadine. Second generation antihistaminics are ionized drugs. They are polar, they cross the blood brain barrier poorly, and they cause lesser sedation. So, second generation antihistamines are preferred because of their ionic structure and lesser lipid solubility. They cross the blood brain barrier poorly and hence cause lesser sedation and are preferred. So, if you have a cough or a cold or an allergy, you prefer to take a second generation antihistamine and not a first generation antihistamine. Uh, Area for absorption. We're talking about the factors which allow for movement of drugs across membrane. Greater is the area for absorption, greater would be the degree of absorption. So the area of absorption in the stomach is much lesser. The intestinal area of absorption is as much as 200 meters square. And so because the area of intestine is so much larger, it is paradoxical that aspirin, which is an acidic drug and should have been absorbed much more in the stomach, though 90% of aspirin is absorbed in the intestine because the area for absorption is so much greater in the intestine. Is that clear? Is it clear? That area of absorption in the intestine helps in overcoming the differences arising because of pH difference. So even aspirin, although it's acidic, is absorbed much greater in the alkaline intestine because the area of absorption is so much greater. Now we are coming to, so that was all about passive transport. It moves it down a concentration gradient, doesn't require energy, not saturable, doesn't have an inhibitor. It depends upon lipid solubility, depends upon degree of ionization, surface area for absorption, and the ionization would depend upon the pH and pK of the drugs. pK of the drugs and pH of the environment. Now, the second way of drug transport is active transport. And active transport, you all know, requires energy. It is against a concentration gradient. This process is saturable. It is highly selective. It can be inhibited using drugs competitively. Inhibition by competitive inhibitors as well as by non-competitive inhibitors. And we'll talk about all these inhibitors much later. An example of active transport is sodium potassium ATPase. It is there in muscles, it is there in the heart, etc. This active transport by this transporter pump enables movement of sodium and potassium across cell membranes. You all know this? Yes? Sodium potassium ATPase, you all know? Yes or no? Okay. So, active transport can be primary or secondary. Primary utilizes energy stored in voltage and ion gradients. Primary active transport is what I've just talked about. Secondary transport utilizes energy stored in voltage and ion gradients generated by primary active transport. So the energy which is generated during the primary active transport is used for transporting another molecule through secondary active transport. So example, sodium potassium ATPase helps in movement of sodium and potassium across the membrane. The ATP generated during this is used for helping movement of calcium and sodium across the membrane. Now, this movement can be by symporter or co-transporters when both the molecules move in the same direction, or this movement can be as an antiporter or counter-transporter when one molecule moves outside and the second molecule in the secondary transport moves inside. Okay? When both primary and secondary molecules move in one direction, it's a symporter or co-transporter. An example of this is sodium potassium 2 chloride pump in the kidneys. You know, sodium potassium 2 chloride in the kidneys. An antiporter or counter transporter could be sodium potassium ATPase or sodium calcium exchanger. The third transport is facilitated transport. It is carrier mediated transport, which is a specific transporter. No energy is needed for this. It is highly selective and can be inhibited by drugs. An example of facilitated transport is for glucose, insulin sensitive glucose transporter. Insulin sensitive glucose transporter. Another example is P-glycoprotein. Now, this transporter by and large helps in expulsion of drugs and molecules from within the cell to outside. And overexpression of P-glycoprotein has actually resulted in decreased concentrations of antibiotics, anti-cancer cells in the cell. It is actually a cause of multi-drug resistance of drugs. So some examples of major drug transporters: ATP binding cassette transporters. It's a superfamily involved in primary active transport. There are 7 classes, ABC A to G, and one example is the P-glycoprotein. Another example or another family of major drug transporters is the solute carrier transporter involved in secondary active transport. It comprises of the organic anion transporting polypeptide and the organic cation transporter, OCT. OATP, organic anion transporting polypeptides, and organic cation transporter. And you'll be coming across these terms and these transporters again and again because many of the drugs act by inhibiting one or more of these transporters to exhibit the action. Okay, second last specialized system of drug movement is by filtration. You all know what is filtration. Passage of drugs through aqueous pores in the membrane through the paracellular space. Lipid-insoluble drugs can cross if the molecular weight is small. Majority of intestinal mucosa and RBCs have small pores, so large drugs cannot cross. Lipid-insoluble drugs cannot cross. But capillaries, especially in the kidneys, have large paracellular spaces, and those drugs can be filtered. So this is very important. You already know what filtration is, but we are talking of everything in the context of drugs now. Endocytosis, exocytosis, large molecules, especially more than 1000 Dalton, like polypeptides, low density lipoproteins, insulin, etc., are taken in by cells by the process of endocytosis and thrown out by cells by the process of exocytosis. You already know what endo and exocytosis is. Pinocytosis is when fluid is engulfed and taken in. Phagocytosis is when particulate matter is engulfed by processes of the cell. You know, the cell extends out processes and engulfs a particle or a fluid, both a fluid or a particle, engulfs it in a vesicle and pushes it inside the cell. So that is what endocytosis is. When the cell throws out the fluid vesicle or the particle vesicle, the vesicle containing the fluid or the vesicle containing the particles, it is known as exocytosis. And transcytosis is a combination of endocytosis plus exocytosis. The drug is taken in by endocytosis and thrown out by exocytosis. So these are very specialized systems of helping the drug move across membranes into the cell and all. And these processes are used by very, very few drugs, large molecule drugs. Now, having finished very, very basic concepts of biological movement of drugs, we come to the second part of today's class on routes of drug administration. Do you people want a 5 minutes break? We've been there for 45 minutes. Can I give you a 5 minutes break? Yes? So somebody said yes. Yes. So what we say is it is 15 to 4. So 5 to 4, you come back. Or 5 minutes later, you come back. Okay? तो भूषण अभी कितना बजे 1 घंटा लेट चल रहा था सुबह अभी भी लेट चल रहा है मतलब एक ग्रुप फोटोग्राफ जो 4 बजे होनी थी वो 4 बजे तो नहीं होगी ना कितना लेट चल रहा है मुझे बताओ क्योंकि डॉक्टर सोनल का मैसेज आया ग्रुप फोटोग्राफ के लिए आओ मैंने डॉक्टर रितु से बोला था मैम 5 बजे उन्होंने कहा था 4:45 तक आ जाना मैं क्लास ले लूंगी ना आप मुझे बताओ मैं अपने कमरे में ही हूँ